Cheers friends, and welcome to my kitchen, and I'm going to be teaching you how to make pasta today. If you've never made pasta, it's quite an adventure, and I'm excited to share this with you. Hey, if we haven't met before, I'm Victoria, and Fortuna Cucina is my company. I make tea, I have a food blog, I teach you how to cook, I do a lot of things involving the kitchen, and this is what I found, is that the kitchen is where all the world's problems melt away. All of the world's problems are solved in the kitchen. And I'm sitting here at my kitchen table for a very special purpose, because I think it's important that I not just teach you how to cook, but we talk about some of the things that come up every day as people, as humans on this planet, and as people who are trying to be better people. And today we're going to be making fresh pasta. Now this pasta is near and dear to my heart because this is the pasta my grandmother used to make. Ravioli was her thing. She would make spinach and ricotta ravioli. She did not deviate. We didn't do pumpkin. We didn't do any fancy flavors, nothing. Spinach and cheese ravioli, and when she wanted to get fancy, she would make gnocchi. And she would only make the ricotta gnocchi, never the potato gnocchi, because she used to tell me it's too heavy, and I'm watching my figure. My grandma. The thing with pasta is there's really more than one kind of pasta. There's egg noodle pasta, and then there's durum wheat pasta. The egg noodle pasta is what is used to make like a ravioli or tortellini, and for that we're going to be using our 00 flour. And I'm going to put all the links below so you can go right to Amazon to order the flour. And here's the thing, is a lot of people purchase fusilli or chieti, these fancy shapes in the store, and that you will see like little nonnas, little grandmas in Italy, like on the streets spending all their days making orchietti or something like that. That is not egg noodle pasta. That's made from durum wheat. Before I get going on my recipe, I wanted to let you know that I'm drinking this month's tea. This is, and it does look blue because it is blue. It has butterfly pea flower in it. This is my Goddess Love Thyself tea. I think for February, it's important to remember that we have to give ourselves some love, not only the people in our lives, but us too. And when was the last time that you gave yourself some love, that you told yourself that you're fantastic and you're doing a great job and all the things, and treated yourself like you would treat your best friend? So this tea is a reminder to do just that. So I absolutely love doing these kinds of videos, but also sharing with other women how they can make a meal from scratch. I think this is really important because especially in today's society, so is it really nourishment, but also does it really feed your soul? And there's something special about what grandma used to make for us. You know what I'm talking about. Maybe you had a grandma or a mom or a special aunt and she would make that dish, and maybe it was a soup, or maybe it was something warm and comforting, or maybe it was just cookies, but they would make something for you and you felt so special. You felt like, it's like that in Ratatouille when the guy tries Remy's ratatouille and he's transported back to his childhood. It's like that. It's like a time machine. And this is something that you need to know as we're venturing into this world of creating pasta from scratch and creating food from scratch. I wanted to show you something I made today. This, my friend, is a scone. Why, Mr. Scone, did you turn out like this? And here's a whole plate so you can see. They're not puffy. They're not dense. They're smushed. I don't know what happened. And this is my second batch in a row that they came out like that. I was talking with my husband about this, and he has great insight, and he said, you know, it's been 20 degrees here in Texas. Do you think that has something to do with it? So heat, cold, humidity has a great impact on what you're cooking. I can tell you firsthand that making pasta in the heat or the humidity will be more frustrating than if you make it in a dry, cold environment. Like Arizona in the spring, perfect. Okay, I grew up in Southern California. I did not understand these problems that I would have here in Texas. While especially it's a rainy day or really humid day, I didn't really get it until I understood that the humidity, the weather, all of that plays a big part in what we're going to cook. I'm going to show you how to make this pasta from scratch without a pasta machine. I do have one of those old school crank things, and you don't need this. Like, you don't need this in your life. If you want to make fresh pasta, make fresh pasta, and we're going to roll it out, and we're going to have guns of steel by the time that we are done with this. Because, and I was thinking about this, my little teeny tiny grandma who's 5 foot nothing and would maybe weighed 100 pounds sopping wet, she would roll the dough out from scratch, right? And she would not use a pasta machine. And it would be paper thin every time. Okay, so we're gonna need to roll the dough out quite a bit. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need anything really fancy for this. Even though I do have the pizza cutters and like the rollers and all of that, really, I could use a rolling pin and a knife. And that's how my grandmother used to make it. So let's talk about the recipe. As we go forward and you're making your pasta, how can you make this dish with love, with intention, with really the idea that you're gonna create something amazing for someone in your life and you as well. And this is what I feel like is the ultimate kitchen magic that we don't talk about, that is the special aspect of what mom and grandma and your favorite aunt used to make. And we can tap into that. But it starts with that idea of, oh my gosh, I love this person so much that I'm gonna make them something that's delicious. All right, let's get going on our recipe. So we're gonna start out with 100 grams of flour and 1 egg. This will give you enough pasta for about 2 people. What I have in this bowl is 200 grams of flour. And we're gonna talk about our flour for a hot second, but since I had 200 grams of flour, this is just a little bit over it. I'm gonna go ahead and make 2 portions because I know that someone in my family is always gonna eat pasta, or we can freeze it. We'll eat it at some point in time. So we're going to purchase Caputo 00 flour. 00 is the fineness that the flour is milled, okay? So this is a very fine flour. We're gonna need this for this recipe. Okay, I live in Texas and it's decided to become spring overnight from after being in a tundra for a while. Now it's spring. It's very humid today. So making pasta, just like everything else, is a skill, and sometimes it's gonna go fantastically and sometimes it's not. I have one of these doodads that is a crank pasta maker, and flour's like coming out of it, so that you put this crank in the side and you can go ahead and crank it. Or you could just use your rolling pin. This is a denser dough. This is not like a fluffy bread dough. And you cannot use a KitchenAid mixer for this and use a bread hook. You have to do this part by hand, okay? So hear me, okay? Even if you wanna use this guy, even if you wanna use the pasta maker of some sort, whether it's the KitchenAid attachment, there's an electric version of this, there's just this plain crank one. Even if you're gonna do that, you have got to be able to knead the dough by hand, and that's what I'm gonna show you how to do now. For thousands of years, women have been coming together, cooking together in community, and there's something really special about that. Well, you and I are coming together cooking in community right now. Even if you're not cooking with me, or maybe you're cooking when I'm not cooking, but we're still coming together, and I love this concept. I thought it would be appropriate to share with you some things that have been on my mind. Now, you can get more detailed information like this if you go to my Substack, where I talk all about food, and I'll put the link below. But while I'm doing the dough, you're gonna be hearing me talk about a situation that's come up. And I wanted to share it with you because I feel like it's really relatable. And I feel like we all go through things like this. So with this pasta, I've already weighed it out. You need, my friends, you need this in your life. You need a kitchen scale. I could put a link below for the kitchen scale that I use. This is rechargeable. You do plug it in. And look, if you're gonna be a bad mamma jamma in the kitchen, you need to weigh out your ingredients. All right, so we're gonna take just most of our flour, okay? This is our 0-0 flour. Make sure your hands are clean because we're gonna be using our hands for this. And I'm gonna be using most of it. And we want it in a mound. I'm gonna reserve about this much just because I know it was about 219 grams. So we're gonna start out by making a volcano. So you can use 2 fingers, 3 fingers, whatever. We're just gonna make a volcano. Like, I know this is not big enough for both of those eggs. So we're just gonna make, this is probably big enough. While we're talking about pasta, I wanted to talk with you about other people's opinions. Now, like, think of me like your Aunt Victoria that we're sitting at coffee talking about these kinds of things. But something came up for me this week, and that is someone had a negative opinion of me, of my business, of how I do things. And what's really interesting is I was really, to use a hip word, to use a popular word, I was really triggered by it. Okay, see how I'm just scrambling these eggs? Okay, and then a little bit of flour at a time is gonna come in. And I'm gonna show you in a second how we're gonna continue to bring in more and more flour. So yeah, this person basically said something nasty about my business, and it took me a couple days to really get over it. And I do struggle with perfectionism. And if you do too, I think it's worth asking yourself, where does this come from? Like, does it come from you always wanting to be right? You always wanting to succeed? Most of the time it leads back to our childhood. And I'm not gonna sit here and like, it's not gonna be therapy hour, but I did wanna share with you that I feel like there's a connection here between other people and their opinions and perfectionism. And if you're someone who's dealt with that at any point in time, then I encourage you to just figure out what the heck is going on. And I had a really big realization. Now, some of you, see how I'm just bringing in the flour? Yep, we're just gonna keep doing that at as slow a pace as you want, okay? So you can either use a bench scraper or just your hand, and I'll get a bench scraper to show you how you do this. Okay. Oh, I got some egg on the counter, whatever. So with the bench scraper, we're just gonna kind of do this, okay? You can use that to kind of guide the flour. So how many times in your life have you dealt with other people's opinions of you and what you do, and maybe they don't feel that you do enough, or that you're good enough, or that you should do this or that, or maybe they just like have shitty opinions about your life, of who you are, how you dress, all of the things in your life. We're just going to continue to try to move that flour together with the egg. So yeah, I had this situation, and this woman was almost nasty. And what I had to realize, and this is kind of came to me, and of course my husband told me this in 2 seconds, but you have to come to these realizations on your own. Especially when you are an entrepreneur and you're doing something different. There's always going to be someone, see how I'm adding more flour? There's always going to be someone who doesn't agree. There's always going to be someone who thinks what you're doing is stupid, or thinks what you're doing is whatever. Okay, so we can continue with the fork if you want to use the fork, okay? I'll show you in a second. We're going to start kneading and folding. Yeah, I'm going to start doing that. But yeah, especially if you run your own business, there's always somebody. And we can use the fork as a tool, or you can continue to use your bench scraper. But scoop and pat, scoop and pat. There's always going to be someone who has opinions of you. And especially if you're the type of person where you are just making your own way in this world, you are just doing your own deal, there's always going to be someone who has an opinion of what you should be doing. It was such a good lesson to me because I really had to sit and think, did this person who really complained about me and my business, is it valid? Is it valid? Or are they just looking to complain? Or are they just looking for a refund? Or are they just having a bad day and taking it out on me? But it really had me thinking about a couple of things. One of which was how much access I give people to me. And if you haven't already started thinking about this, I suggest that you do. Like, if, like, let's say your mother's crazy pants and she just comes over whenever. I mean, I get that these family situations are weird, but how much access does she have to you? Is she saying things that upset you? If you're feeling something about it, I would consider, and see, I'm just folding. So just continue to fold. I would just think about that. I mean, it was just the weirdest situation, and it made me wonder, like, is this what I should be doing with my life? But then I really had this, of course, moment at 1 o'clock in the morning where I realized maybe what I need to be doing is nothing like anybody else. Maybe what I need to be doing is exactly what I would be doing. No one else. So if you think about it, like, if you are running against the grain, if you're just forging your own path, there's always going to be someone who has opinions. So I think we should really put that in the background. And I said, and not like backgrounds, like, you know, have it running while we're thinking about other things during our day, but just don't have that be in the forefront of our minds. And let me tell you, that is really easier said than done. But in this year, I'm really making an effort to put me first. Me, not my kids, not my husband, not my family, but me. And how can we do that? By turning down the volume on all this other crap that's going on in our lives. So if you're someone who considers other people's opinions while you're doing whatever it is you're doing, I would think about maybe how could you turn that down? How could you not listen? Okay, so here on our pasta, and see how I'm just kind of making this into a disc. Like, this dough isn't done. Okay, so here's the poke test. When you poke it, does it spring back to its normal form? Okay, so it sprung back a little bit, but not a tremendous amount. So we're gonna keep kneading. And the interesting thing is there's like all this flour that isn't being absorbed. And here's what I think about that. Like, experts may say different things. I think as long as you're continuing to combine the ingredients together, when your dough is done, it will tell you that it's done. Tell me in the comments, have you ever thought about like how much other people's opinions have had an impact on you? And if so, is it something that you're doing something about right now? Ooh. See what I mean? Like, this is like really a hefty dough. Okay. And I'm just gonna keep kneading for another few more minutes because I still have flour here. If it doesn't get absorbed, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. because after all, like I said, it's a humid day and all of the flour should be absorbed. So maybe it needs a minute to rest. So okay, and remember we're using this part of our hand to knead. Don't use your fingers. So you can, some people fold over like that. I can't remember how I was taught to kind of do it two-handed. I can't even think about how I do it right now. But I'm gonna give it just another minute and then I'm gonna let it rest. We need to let our pasta dough rest for at least 20 minutes and let everything combine. You can either let it rest by covering in plastic wrap, and I hate covering my food in plastic, so I'll just be taking this bowl and I'll empty it out of flour and I will just let it rest that way. And really, if you use the bowl, you shouldn't have any issues with it crusting. And depending upon your location, so in one of the pasta classes I had, some people used a dishcloth to cover the pasta and it was just fine. Well, the next day, other people used, half people used dishcloth, half people used a bowl to cover their pasta. And some people did experience sort of that alligator skin that you get from your pasta kind of drying out a little bit. And it's not going to impact flavor, it's just not going to be super pretty. So, I mean, we're spending all this time, we want it to look nice, right? So either cover it with a bowl or a plastic wrap. And remember, this process might be different every time you do it, based upon temperature, humidity, that sort of thing. Okay, this is almost done. And then I think I'm just gonna leave this a little bit of flour here. Let's just combine and try to do the poke test one more time. Roll it into a ball. Oh yeah, got those ready to rest. So I'm just gonna do this. I have my extra flour set aside here and my bowl on top. We're gonna let this rest for 20 minutes and then we're gonna finish it. So a word on letting your dough rest. I've made pasta a lot, and one thing I have to say is I don't make it every day though. For some people who make it every day, you're gonna have a different experience. You're gonna know exactly when that dough is ready. So I've heard so many people say, wait 20 minutes and then work your dough. But here's the reality that I experienced. I actually forgot about my dough. I was feeding my family, I was making dinner, I was recording a video, and then I go, oh, holy smokes, I forgot about my dough. This dough was so much easier to roll out than any other dough that I've experienced. I left it for about an hour. Here's the deal, this is a personal situation. There's raw egg in this dough. So you don't wanna leave it out all day, thinking I'm gonna leave it out for 6 hours and then when I try it again, it's gonna be great. I wouldn't recommend that, but for some people, you're only gonna be comfortable leaving your dough out to rest for 20 minutes. For other people, an hour might be your deal. I want you to kind of experiment with this. All of the recommendations I've read have said 20 minutes, but I'm a rebel, and so I left my dough for an hour. So you do you, boo. You figure out what works for you. I wanted to mention this though, because sometimes your dough can be really hard to work if you haven't left it for long enough to rest. Like I said, this is a personal decision. I wanted to give you this information because I wanted to share my experience, which was I left it and ignored it for an hour, and then it was way easier to roll out than the day before when I only left it for 20 minutes. And again, things could have been like the heat and the humidity and all of the things. However, I thought that was really interesting. So I'm going to encourage you to have a little experiment to come up with your own ways for figuring out when your dough is ready. We're going to be rolling out our dough here, and this is not really complicated. The one thing I will mention is we want to make sure that we go forward and back. Do not go in a million different directions. We're not making a pie here. We're going forward and back. And my grandmother used to always roll out her dough and then cut with a knife huge rectangles. So think of that. We're just trying to get to the rectangle shape. It's going to be forward and back. Now, as we're working on our dough here, I was thinking about our conversation that we had just a second ago about other people's opinions of us. And the answer for me is always, all right, this is good information to know, but what do I do with it? We all need to practice having boundaries and not letting things bother us. And there's just no easy way to do this. As a reformed people pleaser, I can tell you that it's really hard for me to know that there's people out there that don't like me. And there will continue to be until like forever and ever, amen. There'll be people who do not like me, and that is okay. It's good to set boundaries and also reevaluate your boundaries when something like this comes up. Sometimes we have people in our lives, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a spouse or sibling or something, and they have certain opinions of you. And the one thing I will say is, for adjacent family members who have lots of opinions about me, I'll be honest with you, I've stopped telling them a lot about my life. I've stopped telling them about things that I really hold dear, because then like they're not going to come back later. Well, you said da, 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 da. That's a boundary too, is not sharing everything with everybody. So you're going to have to figure out where your boundaries are and how much you want to exercise them. I want to encourage you to think about that this week. Let's talk about this dough for a hot second. So I'm trying my best to roll this out into a rectangle. And if I did this every day, I would have mad skills, but I don't do this every day. The one thing that I want to point out is once your dough gets really thin, be careful using your fingers with it. Instead, use your fingers just to get the dough up off of your board or your counter, and then use the backs of your hands if you're going to move it. Here I'm folding, and we just want to fold this, and we're going to use a sharp knife to cut it. I'm in a hot climate and a humid climate, so I'm using semolina to coat this pasta. And then I'm just going to go ahead and cut it. And I'm cutting thicker noodles like a pappardelle. I'm probably going to have this with a bolognese rather than a lighter sauce. I find the pappardelle like really complements the bolognese. And that's pretty much it with making pasta. The only thing else I'm going to point out is you can roll out your dough as thin or as thick as you want. And if you want really thin, delicate noodles, that's an option. If you want a thicker, heartier noodle for something like a soup, that's an option too. It just depends upon what you want. And as you get more proficient in making fresh pasta, what you're going to find is that you're going to have your own preference for how thin or how thick you want your pasta. And if you want to do it by hand or if you want to use a machine. And if you want to use a machine, there's no shame in that game. I mean, you do you. The cheapest I found on Amazon was for sale. It was one of those little crank pasta machines, and it was about $50 on sale. Normally they're about $100. So that's the deal. Make sure you coat your pasta well with semolina and put it in an airtight container. I like to use these glass containers. And if you are going to freeze this, I would freeze it in little clumps so that you have the option of just using a little bit at a time. The one thing I have to point out is when you boil this, your pasta and your semolina will end up in the bottom of your pot. The bottom of your pasta pot. So we're gonna want to either use a actual pasta cooker or some type of a scoopy strainer thing to get the pasta out. We want the semolina to remain in the pot on the bottom of the water. Why? Because if you take your pot of pasta and you dump it all out into the sink, you're going to get all that semolina back onto your pasta, and that's not what we want. We're just using the semolina because it's a good option for helping your pasta not stick. So that's a tip in relation to using the semolina. All right, friends, thanks so much for joining me today. I hope this conversation gave you some insight, maybe some things to think about, and also gave you a delicious recipe. So I want you to try this pasta. This is not difficult. It takes a little bit of time, but there's something magical about creating dinner, creating a meal just from a few ingredients, and make it with love, make it with intention, make it with all of your heart and soul, and it will be the most delicious meal you've ever had. Recipes for the pasta and for my marinara sauce are on my blog, and the links are below. Thanks for joining me today.